Hello and welcome to another episode of the Startup Operator Podcast. I'm Roshan
And I'm Gunjan Saha, and together we'll be bringing you the biggest headlines from India's startup ecosystem. But before we begin, Roshan, do you know anyone who is coming from abroad? Me from the
abroad?
US. Yeah.
Why?
Well, I'm considering getting a new laptop. So,
Okay. Yeah, quite a few people have asked. I mean, you'll have to wait in line, and perhaps my friends will have to get a license also for this.
license? Well, I don't think they'll need a license, but yeah, well, you're getting at something. India has mandated licensing for the import of laptops and tablets or any personal devices. Along with that, the center has also released the draft National Deep Tech Startup Policy, which is now open for public deliberation. Vanguard, which is, I guess, probably the world's largest mutual funds manager, they have slashed OLA's valuation by over 52%. Now, that's a massive, massive cut. We also have X challenging India's content blocking mandate and the 5 million rupees fine in the Karnataka High Court. So a lot of interesting stuff to discuss this week. We'll get started. Okay, so import restrictions, right? The Indian government has restricted the imports of laptops, tablets and personal computers with immediate effect. Imports will be allowed with a valid license for restricted imports, and this move is aimed to boosting manufacturing in India. Now, the response from the industry has been mixed, and many people are calling it as, the government just putting red tape. But what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, so a couple of clarifications to begin with, right? I mean, this is not a ban. The government is only saying that you need to have a license. So, yes, they are seeking to restrict the imports, but not to the extent of a ban, right? I mean, that's the first thing. Second thing, you can still get laptops for Gunjan from Dubai or US or wherever else. One at a time, I think, should be fine, right? Whatever you can carry in your luggage. If you're going to get import number of laptops, then you might need a license, right? But with this demand, yeah. Why is the government doing this? See, we have to understand that we import about $20 billion worth of all of these laptops and other equipment, every year. Now, it's a massive amount, right? And what the government is trying to do is figure if, some of that can be absorbed within the ecosystem itself in terms of creating jobs, creating capabilities and investments in the country. And so we've seen this before in, let's say smartphones, electronic manufacturing, so on and so forth, right? Where, today, for instance, 7% of all iPhones are assembled here in India. That is something that the government is seeking to do in this domain as well. One thing that I will say is that, the policy communication has been a bit, I won't say brash, but it is very uncertain, right? I think there has to be more seamless communication from the government and also thinking from the industry perspective in terms of, hey, how will this affect the industry and what they have to do to kind of manage this in the near term, right? That is something that I think the government has to pay more attention to. Let's see. I think it's a good move in the sense that it will create jobs, it will create capabilities and skills and so on in India, for sure. And it's something that we have to do, right? Look, we have to get over this whole 90s phenomena of considering India as the largest market and simply import whatever you want, right? You also have to negotiate that, because I think where we are right now geopolitically, I think it makes a lot of sense. You saw this with Tesla, for instance. We discussed it a few roundups back on how 3 years back, Tesla was complaining about all of the import taxes and so on and so forth. And Shri Nitin Gadkari was very firm in his resolve that, look, we won't offer any concessions, but you're free to set up manufacturing and, employ people here. And Tesla finally has indicated that they will do that, right? So considering India's size, India's demographic, and where we are geopolitically, I think it makes a lot of sense for us to do it, So the PLI or production-linked incentives have worked fabulously well. And, we've spoken many times on how the manufacturing lever has to kick in for India, if we have to inch towards that $5 trillion mark, right? So I feel it's a good move. I only feel that it could have been more seamless in terms of policy communication and so on. And hopefully the government takes note of it.
Okay. Few things here, right? This PLI scheme 2.0, this was announced in, I think, May 2023. And this is just specifically for IT hardware. right? And as you mentioned, the whole goal for this is to get manufacturing running in India. But if for whatever reason this system breaks, then Indian consumers will need to wait additional months, let's say, to purchase the latest model of a laptop, because acquiring these licenses will be something that will be taking time.
It's a near term trouble, and I think it'll be sorted out, right? I mean, so for instance, in the short term, if a restaurant changes its menu, then it'll cause all kinds of inconvenience, right? I mean, think of it that way. And these are macro decisions. So obviously, I'm not saying that, it won't have any, what do you call, I mean, it won't have any trouble. It will in the near term, right? People have to acquire these licenses, and there will be delays in terms of getting your favorite laptops, and they could potentially cost more if the cost for acquiring licenses, etc., has been transferred to the consumers, etc. But over a period of time, I think it'll even out.
I guess this is something we should keep an eye out for.
Yeah.
The government has also issued a draft national deep tech startup policy to address the challenges faced by startups and enhance the ecosystem. The draft policy is open for public feedback until September 15th. The policy outlines 4 key pillars, which are securing India's economic future, progressing towards a knowledge-driven economy, bolstering national capability and sovereignty through the Atmanirbhar Bharat imperative, and encouraging ethical innovation. We have been talking about the growth of deep tech companies in India, and we have also lauded at how the government has decided to step out of this and let these companies self-regulate themselves. But well, I guess it was only a matter of time until we saw a policy within the space. What is your take on it? How do you think this will be?
See, India, I feel on the tech policy side of things, we could actually spur innovation with policy. You've seen, for instance, how the RBI has been very proactive in doing that, right, with the whole digitization as well, right? So I feel like, on this as well, right? I mean, with a few aspects, including the National Research Mission and the other aspects, I feel like the government is trying to streamline things and make it easier for startups, right? I mean, don't think of it as regulation in terms of like what we just discussed, right? Let's say restricting imports and those kind of things, right? I think that, any government in the world today is thinking about and grappling with the consequences of what would happen in the case of AI. Deep tech beyond all of this, right? I mean, think of, let's say, early cancer detection or some new kind of fancy drug or some prosthetics, robotics, all of those things. I mean, we have a software bias and we tend to think of tech in only those terms. But even all of these hardware and those kind of tech as well, right? I mean, it's pretty important. It's very important, in fact. Right, and what the government is trying to do is just basically recognize that it's important and figure out what are the pillars necessary for it to kind of succeed, and that's what this whole draft policy talks about basically.
Well, yeah, you're right. The key priorities for the government through this policy are nurturing research development and innovation, strengthening intellectual property regime, facilitating access to funding, which I think will be very important. Then there's infrastructure access and resource sharing. So what the government is really trying to aim here is to facilitate that knowledge sharing and make sure that people have access to resources and infrastructure they need.
See, you look at space, for instance, right? I mean, the fact that there was an Indian Space Association that was formed and that ISRO has been so proactive in working with startups, sharing their facilities and so on, it's really created an amazing sort of a push in that sector, right? And that can happen in other areas as well. I mean, certainly, there are research organizations in India doing fantastic work. And they could definitely share their facilities, know-how, resources with other people in the domain. And I think, building a common platform on that is fantastic. I mean, people keep talking about how India spends less than 1% of our GDP on research. Well, I mean, it's an aspirational thing. I think we should, catch up and spend the required amount, maybe double, triple that amount, right? But in the meantime, there are some very low-hanging fruits that government has to take care of, right? And one of these things is this, basically.
Another aspect of this policy is that they're also setting up the Center for Deep Tech Translation and just figure out that how you convert the research into a product through
practical applications. Yeah,
the commercialization of deep tech products.
Right.
So that should also be interesting. Moving on, Vanguard has cut the worth of its holding in Ola by more than half since its original investment. The asset manager marked down the holding of its Ola shares to $25 million from the $51.7 million purchase price years ago. The cut in worth of Ola's shares by Vanguard implies a reduction in the company's valuation to $3.5 billion. And Ola, since being founded over a decade ago, they have raised more than 3.9 billion over the years. So interesting number here. They have raised more money than what they're currently valued. But yeah, Ola, I think it's a big company and I think they can weather the storm.
It comes at a time when Uber has just turned profitable. Think about it. They have like I think a 30 billion, $36 billion run rate, right? And they have done a few good things, right? They've gotten out of all of the businesses where they were not seeing profits. They've gotten out of geographies where they were not seeing profits. And come 2020, they made a few cuts on headcount and so on and so forth. They've streamlined their operations. And at a certain scale, I mean, they are turning over a profit at this point. So I think there will be some kind of a consolidation in India as well, right, in terms of ride sharing. Ride sharing is here to stay. It's not going to go away for sure, right? I mean, it's an irreversible change. Nobody is going to go back to booking taxis and cabs off of registers and telephone directories and so on, right? I mean, obviously that's not going to happen. So they will figure a way to work the business, right? But at the same time, I think most of the energy has kind of shifted to Ola Electric right now. And in fact, Bhavish is full-time on Ola Electric itself. So, yeah. So, as you said, Vanguard is one of the largest mutual fund managers in the world, and they own 0.8% of Ola. So they've decided to mark down their valuation for whatever reason. And interestingly, at the same time, they've seen an appreciation in HDFC and L&T, right? So yeah, I mean, these things happen, I suppose, periodically.
Well, Bhavish has also been busy. He's setting up an AI startup, right? And he's looking to build a large language model and is also currently scouting two AI companies in the US for acquisitions. And is also thinking of venturing into the semiconductor design space.
You know how he does this?
How?
Because he doesn't believe in Saturdays and Sundays. So there was an interesting interview of his on Your Story, right?
Yeah.
Where he basically said, Saturdays and Sundays are a Western concept, right? So, but in all seriousness, I think he makes a good point, right?
Our generation is destined to toil.
Yeah. Ominous. But basically, it talks about harmony, right? Work-life harmony and not balance. And yeah, man, props to him. I mean, if he can run all of these different companies, right? I mean, we definitely need bold entrepreneurs. We definitely need people focused on creating IP in India. So yeah, more power to him.
So would you call him the Indian Musk?
We'll wait. He's Bhavish, and Bhavish obviously is, that name itself carries a lot of weight in India for now. But yeah, we'll see if he becomes the next Musk.
Alright, talking about Musk, X has challenged the Indian court's ruling over his non-compliance with the Indian government's orders of removing certain content. The social media company argues that the rulings could embolden the center to flag more content for blocking, widening the scope of censorship. So in June 2023, the Karnataka High Court dismissed the plea and slapped the company with a hefty fine of 5 million rupees. X has now filed a 96-page appeal against the decision, arguing that this will embolden the government to make more such blocking orders.
Well, this back and forth will keep going on, right? I mean, like I said, it's not a platform anymore; it's a publisher as well. So this is what happens to publishers. And I'm sure that a bunch of all these newspapers and whatnot, right, including Times or the Washington Post or whatever, all of these will have ongoing cases with the courts and the government and whatnot. And yeah, X is also going to be treated the same way, I suppose.
But when Elon Musk took over Twitter, he said that India is one of the key markets for them, and we should have cordial relations with the government, with the local authorities and stuff like that. And right now he is again taking the old route of saying blame the government.
Yeah, these minor things will keep happening. Like I said, I mean, they will go back and forth on what is kosher and what is not, right? The government should be definitely firm on its front in terms of, what is admissible and not. And we have our own laws, right? I mean, Twitter or X cannot function as a sort of a supranational entity and govern itself through its own laws, right? Obviously, in the US, you've seen all these congressional hearings and everything. Certainly, they adhere to all the laws of the land there. So what is the problem in adhering to the laws here, right? So, yeah.
Right. Okay, some other updates from the ecosystem. Bangalore-based growth stage investor Elevate Venture Partners on Friday said that it has marked the first close of its maiden investment vehicle, Elevate Capital Fund 1, at $67 million. This is nearly a year after it was launched. In this week's Talk of the Town section, we have this interesting tweet by New York Times journalist Erin Griffith. She writes, crazy lawsuit from an investor, SoftBank, against a startup, IRL. SoftBank invested $150 million in 2021. 25 million went to insiders on the claim that IRL had 12 million monthly users. But the company was spending 50K a month on a bot army, and the app was a virtual ghost town.
It's crazy. This is what happens in FOMO world, basically, right? 2021, I mean, everyone just went crazy, and due diligence was a four-letter word. And yeah, this is what happens, and it can happen to some of the best people, right? I mean, Tiger, SoftBank, A16Z, you name it, Sequoia. Everyone can miss a trick here and there. But the reason why we're talking about this is also because, see, corporate governance, I think some of them, make it out to be an acutely Indian issue. I don't think it is. That kind of self-flagellation is not required. It happens everywhere, right?
Yeah.
There are scams
We
and
saw
frauds in every bull market everywhere, right? It's not unique to India. And these are times when, we'll have to look at these and figure a tighter way to regulate some of this stuff, right? Self-regulate, I mean. So, yeah.
She continues to write, employees literally creating Jira tickets to add fake
Yeah.
users and fake
Insane.
chats to the platform.
Crazy. Again, I think Silicon Valley was such an amazing series, I mean, it showed a bunch of this as well. So, yeah.
All right, folks. So that's it for this week's roundup. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. Do subscribe to the channel for regular updates. If you want updates to be delivered straight into your WhatsApp inbox, you'll find a WhatsApp link in the description. And just keep sending us your love. Like this video, share it with your friends, and tune back again next week for more updates. Take care.
See you guys. Cheers.